The billionaire's mother found the ultrasound and called her before he did. The radiator in Kristen's kitchen had been making that sound for 3 weeks. Not a clank exactly, more like something small and metal trying to escape from inside the wall. She'd called her landlord twice, left a voicemail once he hadn't called back. She'd stopped expecting him to. It was a Tuesday evening in late October, the kind that Huntersville did well. The air sharp enough to feel, the sky going dark before 5, the maple out front already halfway stripped. She was standing at the stove in her socks, 1 foot on top of the other, stirring pasta that had started to stick to the bottom of the pot. Her sweater had a small hole near the right cuff. She knew. She wore it anyway. The Trader Joe's bag sat on the counter where she'd dropped it, one of the handles slightly torn from the time she'd overpacked it with canned tomatoes. Inside, 2 bell peppers, a block of Parmesan she probably couldn't justify, and a bottle of wine she absolutely couldn't. She wasn't thinking about Marc Donovan. That was what she told herself, while she turned down the burner and listened to the wind pick up outside. She hadn't thought about him when she'd grabbed the wine. Hadn't thought about him when she'd driven past the old Donovan house on her way back and noticed the dark grey Audi in the driveway. The same car, or maybe a new version of the same car, it was hard to tell in the dark. Hadn't thought about him. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She didn't pick it up. The pasta water boiled over. They'd grown up 4 houses apart on Quail Ridge Drive, which meant they'd spent most of their childhoods pretending the distance between their front yards didn't exist. Marc had been the kind of kid who collected things. Baseball cards, bottle caps, the names of every bridge in North Carolina. And Kristen had been the kind of kid who listened. She'd spent hours on the Donovan's porch swing while he explained whatever he was obsessed with that week, her legs dangling, her chin in her hands, genuinely interested in ways she didn't fully understand until she was much older. They'd gone to the same middle school, same high school, sat 3 seats apart in AP English their junior year. He'd written his college essay about a road trip they'd taken with their families to Asheville when they were 12, and he'd let her read it before he submitted it. She'd cried a little and told him it was good. It was good. He'd gone to Boston for college, then stayed for business school, then stayed for the first company, then the second. She'd gone to Chapel Hill, come back, got her teaching credential, found a classroom full of 3rd graders who needed someone to read to them, like the words actually mattered. They'd stayed in touch the way people do when they're both too stubborn to admit they've lost each other. A text here, a happy birthday there, the occasional phone call that lasted 2 hours and left her feeling strangely empty after she hung up. And then his father died. She heard about it from her mom first, which felt wrong. Drove past the house the next day and saw the cars in the driveway and the lights on and thought about stopping. Didn't. Sent a card instead, the kind with a simple border and nothing written inside except her handwriting. "I'm so sorry, you know where I am." He showed up on her porch 9 days later. Not the Marc she'd been building in her head for years. Not the CEO version, the Boston version, the version that existed in LinkedIn photos and the business section of the Charlotte Observer. Just Marc. The one with the wrinkled shirt and the eyes that looked like he hadn't slept properly in 2 weeks, standing on her porch with his hands in his jacket pockets. "Hey," he said. "Hey," she said back. She opened the door wider and he came in. They'd gone for a walk that first night, down past the elementary school and around the pond, the same route they'd done 100 times as kids. It was cold. She'd lent him her extra scarf, the burgundy one with a small fraying at the edge, and he'd wrapped it around his neck without commenting on it. He didn't talk much about his father. She didn't push. "I forgot how quiet it is here," he said at some point, looking out at the pond. "You get used to it again," she said. "Takes about a week." "That mean you think I'm staying a week?" She shrugged. "I have no idea what you're doing." He laughed, a short reel sound, the kind she'd stored somewhere in the back of her mind without realizing it. "Neither do I," he said. "Honestly, I have no idea." The wind moved through the trees. A dog barked somewhere on the next street. She pulled her jacket tighter and didn't say anything else, and neither did he, and somehow that felt like enough. The second walk happened 3 days later, then another. Then they stopped counting. He'd bring coffee from the place on Main Street, the independent one, not the chain, the one with the sticky laminate tables and the barista who always looked like she was working on a thesis. Kristen took hers with oat milk and too much sugar. And he remembered that without being told, which she didn't examine too carefully. Her classroom was doing a unit on maps that week. She talked about it while they walked, about this one kid, she called him the geography one, who'd brought in a hand-drawn map of his neighborhood and placed his own house exactly at the center of it. Every street radiating out like he was the middle of the world. That's not wrong, Marc said. It's deeply wrong, spatially. Maybe not emotionally. She looked at him sideways. He was watching the road ahead, something quiet in his face. You've gotten philosophical, she said. I've been in Boston too long. She laughed and he smiled at the sound of it, and the late October light was low and gold on the sidewalk, and the maple trees were doing their thing, and she told herself it was all fine, completely fine. None of this meant anything unusual at all. It was Friday when she found the receipt she'd shoved in her coat pocket 3 days earlier, from the Trader Joe's run, crumpled with a coffee ring on one corner. She'd been in a rush, grabbed too much, forgotten half of what she'd actually needed. She'd also, without quite planning to, bought the kind of wine he liked. She stood in her kitchen and looked at that fact for a moment. The radiator made its sound. The maple branches scratched lightly against the side of the house. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a car with a bad muffler turned onto the street and drove away. She put the receipt in the trash. She opened the wine anyway. Her phone buzzed. She looked this time. Are you home tonight? She stared at the message for a count of 3. Then she typed back, yeah, why? The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Just checking. She set the phone face down on the counter. The pasta water had gone cold. She turned the burner back on and watched the bubbles start to form at the bottom of the pot. Slow at first, then faster, until the whole surface was moving. He'd extended his stay again. Kristen found out the way she found out most things about Marc these days, not because he told her directly, but because she drove past the house on Thursday morning and the Audi was still there, and then again on Friday afternoon, and again on Saturday when she went to the farmer's market on Main and saw him standing at the apple stand with his phone in his hand and his jacket open despite the cold. He looked up before she could decide what to do with the information. Hey. He raised his chin, like they'd planned this, like this was just something that happened now. Hey, she said, you're still here. Apparently. She shifted the canvas tote on her shoulder. It had a small embroidered sunflower on the front that one of her students had made her 2 years ago, the stitching slightly uneven, deeply sincere. I thought you had Boston stuff. I do. He glanced at his phone, then put it in his pocket. Boston stuff can wait. She didn't ask what that meant. She bought her apples. He fell into step beside her on the way back to the parking lot, and neither of them acknowledged that he'd done it. The pattern became a thing before either of them named it. She had papers to grade on weeknights, which meant she was usually at the kitchen table by 7 with a mug of tea. She'd forget to finish and a red pen she'd chew on the end of without realizing. He'd text around 8. Sometimes still up. Sometimes just her name, which was worse somehow, more familiar. She'd text back. They'd end up on the phone, and an hour would disappear. He asked good questions. That had always been true. He'd ask about the geography kid, about what the classroom smelled like in October, construction paper and hand sanitizer, she told him, and someone always has a granola bar. And he'd listen in that way he had, like he was actually filing it away somewhere. You know you don't have to do that, she said one night, around 10, the red pen still uncapped on the table. Do what? Ask about my job like it's interesting. A pause. I think it's interesting. You run a company with 400 employees, Marc, and you have 23 kids who think you hung the moon. I'm not sure which one of us has the harder job. She didn't have an answer for that. She picked up the pen and looked at the stack of papers and said, I should probably... Yeah, he said. Me too. But neither of them hung up for another 20 minutes. It was Patricia Donovan who suggested the porch. She'd been in the house all week, managing paperwork, going through closets, doing the quiet work of grief that nobody talked about, and she'd started leaving the side door unlocked for Marc in a way that felt less like a habit and more like an invitation extended to include whoever he happened to bring, which was, increasingly, Kristen. "It's cold," Kristen said. The Friday evening, Patricia handed her a glass of red wine and pointed toward the back door. "There's blankets." Patricia said it like that settled it. The back porch of the Donovan house faced the lake. Not a fancy view, not the kind people paid for, but a real one. The water dark and flat in the evening, the lights from the houses on the far side blurring in it. The neighbor's dog was going at something in the yard next door. The wind came off the water and smelled like wet leaves and something faintly metallic, the way cold air did when it was ready to turn serious. Marc had gotten there before her. He was in one of the old wooden chairs, the ones that had been on that porch since at least 1994, the paint long since given up, with a beer bottle resting on his knee and his eyes on the water. He looked different here than he did anywhere else, not softer exactly, more like a version of himself that hadn't had to work at anything yet. "Your mum ambushed me with Bordeaux," Kristen said, settling into the other chair and pulling one of the blankets around her. "She does that." He didn't look over. "She thinks wine fixes things." "Does it?" "Sometimes." He tilted the beer bottle slightly. "Not always." She tucked her feet up under her. The wine was good, better than the bottle she'd opened by herself earlier in the week, definitely better than anything she'd have bought on a teacher's salary. She didn't say that. They talked for a while about nothing, which with Marc always became something. The dog next door finally quieted. The wind picked up. She pulled the blanket higher. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yeah. Why did you really stay?" He was quiet, not uncomfortable, just taking his time, the way he'd always done with questions that mattered. "The house needs things done," he said. "Co-O's handling the Boston stuff." "That's not what I asked." He looked at her then. The light from inside the house caught the side of his face, the jaw that hadn't seen a razor in 4 or 5 days, the line at the corner of his eye that hadn't been there in his 20s. "No," he said. "I guess it's not." She waited. "I don't know," he said. "I got here and it felt like—" He stopped, ran his thumb over the label on the beer bottle, like there was something I'd been about to say for a long time, and I kept just not saying it. Her heart did something she didn't approve of. "That's vague," she said. "I know. Historically, you're a pretty specific person." "Historically?" He almost smiled. "Yeah." The lake made no sound. The wind moved through the bare branches of the oak at the edge of the yard. "You know what I remember?" he said. "That summer before I left for Boston. We were right here. You were reading something, I don't even remember what. And I thought, I should just say it, I should just tell her." Kristen's fingers had gone still around the wine glass. "And then I didn't," he said. "And then I left. And I told myself it was better that way." He paused. "I was wrong, I just didn't know it yet." She didn't say anything for a moment. The word yet sat between them, doing a lot of work. "Marc, you don't have to—" "I know I don't have to." She set the wine glass on the railing. The base made a soft sound against the wood. "I just want to get something straight." He waited. That was one of the things about him. He knew how to wait. "If you're saying what I think you're saying, she said, "you should know that I've been mad at you about it for approximately 15 years. He exhaled, not quite a laugh, but close. "That's fair." "It is." She looked at him. The lake was flat and dark behind him. "It really is." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind that happens when two people have just said something true and are letting it settle. His hand moved, barely, and rested near hers on the armrest between the chairs. Not touching, just there. She looked at it for a moment, then she looked at him. His voice was low when he spoke. "I keep thinking about that road trip, Asheville. You fell asleep on my shoulder in the back seat, and I spent 3 hours not moving because I didn't want to wake you up. You were 12. I know how old I was." She bit the inside of her cheek. It was that, or smile, and she wasn't ready to smile yet. The feeling in her chest was too complicated for smiling. It was old and new at the same time, warm and slightly terrifying. The way it always was when something you'd pretended not to want was suddenly right in front of you. "You're still supposed to be organizing boxes," she said quietly. "I organized 4 boxes today. I think that counts." "It doesn't." "Probably not." He turned to look at her and his voice dropped without him noticing. "Kristen." Just her name. That was all. Her breath did something it wasn't supposed to do. The neighbor's porch light came on. A car pulled into the driveway 2 houses down, the headlights sweeping briefly across the yard. The oak tree moved. She picked up her wineglass. "Tell me," she said. "Say the whole thing." And he did. She walked home around midnight. Her boots made small sounds on the sidewalk. The street was empty, lit in that orange-yellow way of residential streets late at night, all the houses buttoned up. The neighborhood quiet except for the wind and the sound of something, a branch maybe or a shutter, knocking rhythmically somewhere down the block. She hadn't kissed him. She'd almost. They'd been close enough. The chair moved at some point, or maybe she'd leaned. And there had been a moment when his face was only a few inches from hers, and she could see the small scar above his eyebrow from when he'd fallen off his bike at 10 years old. And then his mother's voice had floated out through the kitchen window, asking if anyone wanted more wine, and the moment had broken apart like it always did. She touched her fingers to her lips anyway. Not yet, she told herself. Just not yet. Her phone buzzed in her pocket as she reached her front gate. She already knew who it was. She left it there. The porch light was on. She hadn't left it on. She stood at the bottom of her steps for a moment, looking up at it. Then she went inside. The first kiss happened on a Wednesday, not a Friday, not a Saturday, not one of those evenings with the right light and the right wine and the lake doing its thing in the background. A Wednesday. She was in her kitchen in a sweatshirt that said Chapel Hill across the front, in letters that had mostly faded to grey, her hair in a bun she'd done without looking, grading a spelling test where one kid had written because 4 separate times in 4 separate sentences with 4 separate levels of confidence. Marc had knocked twice and let himself in. She'd given him a key 2 weeks ago, for emergencies, she'd said, because sometimes she locked herself out, which was true but not really the reason. He'd taken it without making a thing of it, which she'd appreciated. "I brought food," he said, setting a paper bag on the counter, from the place on Gilead Road, the one with the chalkboard menu and the soup that changed every day. "I'm grading." "You can grade and eat." She looked up. He was already opening cabinets, finding bowls like he'd done it 100 times, which he hadn't, maybe 30, but it felt like 100. And she wasn't sure when that had happened exactly. What kind? Tomato. The good kind, not the canned kind. She put the spelling test down. They ate at the kitchen table with the overhead light on because the afternoon had gone overcast and grey, the kind of grey that settled over Huntersville in November like it had nowhere else to be. He'd also brought bread, sourdough, half a loaf, slightly warm still from the bag, and she tore a piece without asking, which felt like something. He talked about a call he'd had that morning, some issue with a logistics contract in Ohio. She didn't follow all of it, didn't try to, but she listened to the shape of his voice, the way it changed when he was working through a problem. There was a version of Marc Donovan that the world got, precise, measured, the kind of man who said exactly what he meant and meant exactly what he said. She'd seen interviews. She'd read the Observer profile 2 years ago that her mother had texted her a link to with a completely neutral interesting. This version was different. This version left his elbows on the table. "You're doing that thing," he said. "What thing?" "Where you analyze me." She broke off another piece of bread. "I'm a 3rd-grade teacher. I don't analyze people." "You analyze everything. You always have." He wasn't saying it like a complaint. "You used to do it when we were kids, too. Just watch. Figure out what someone actually meant. That's called listening. Most people don't do it." She looked at him across the table. There was a coffee stain on the sleeve of his shirt. Not a fresh one. The kind that had been through the wash and never quite came out. His hair was slightly longer than it had been when he'd arrived, just enough to notice. "What am I analyzing right now?" she asked. He held her gaze. "I'm not sure I want to know." The soup had gone a little cold. Neither of them picked up their spoons. She didn't know who moved first. She'd think about it later. That night at 2 in the morning, staring at the ceiling with her heart doing something irregular and her brain absolutely refusing to let her sleep, and she still wouldn't be able to say. One moment there was the table between them and the grey afternoon light, and the half-eaten bread, and then there wasn't. His hand came up to the side of her face, careful, like a question. Their foreheads touched before their lips ever did. She felt him breathe out, slow, like he'd been holding it. She knew the feeling. She'd been holding something for approximately 15 years, and the weight of it was suddenly, unexpectedly gone. The kiss was quiet. Nothing like the ones in the movies she put on when she couldn't sleep, the sweeping ones with the music and the rain. This was just them. His thumb at her jaw, her hand finding the front of his shirt, the bread going stale on the table. When they pulled back, she kept her eyes closed for a second. "Okay," she said. "Yeah," he said. She opened her eyes. He was watching her with an expression she didn't have a word for, careful and certain at the same time, like someone who'd made a decision and was at peace with it. "That was a long time coming," she said. 15 years, give or take. Closer to 20. He almost smiled. "I'm not going to argue with that." The radiator in the hallway made a sound. She laughed, a small, surprised laugh. At the timing of it, at all of it. And he laughed too, and the kitchen felt smaller than it had an hour ago, which she was pretty sure was not how physics worked. November became something else entirely. They moved through it quietly, the way you move through something you don't want to rush. Dinners at her place, sometimes at his. His house on the lake felt enormous the first few times, all clean lines and tall windows, and the kind of silence that came from good insulation, so different from her drafty semi-detached, with the one vent that blew cold air no matter what season. She curled up on his couch in her socks, and he didn't comment on the socks, which she filed away as a significant data point. Saturdays they started going to Whole Foods together. Not because either of them needed to exactly. She could have kept going to the Walmart on Gilead like she always had, but because it became the kind of thing they did. He'd push the cart. She'd veer off to look at something that caught her eye, and he'd follow without being asked. They argued about olive oil once earnestly for 6 minutes, and she won. They didn't talk about what it was. She didn't ask, and he didn't offer, and that was fine, more than fine, actually. Except for the part of her brain that woke up at 2 in the morning and started doing math she hadn't asked it to do. About Boston, about the company, about the fact that she had 23 kids who needed her in room 14 every morning at 7:45, and his life existed on a scale that she couldn't always see the edges of. She didn't say any of that. She bought the expensive olive oil. It was a Saturday in late November when she found the test. She hadn't been looking for it, wasn't late, wasn't worried, hadn't even considered it until she was standing in the pharmacy on Gilead picking up cold medicine, and her eye passed over the display and something went quiet and certain in the back of her head. She bought 2, stood in the checkout line behind a man with a cart full of dog food, and told herself she was being thorough. She was thorough twice. Both times. She sat on the edge of the bathtub in her small bathroom with the tile that had a crack running from the window to the corner, the kind that the landlord had promised to fix 2 years ago, and held the tests in both hands and looked at them for a long time. Outside, the maple was bare now. The wind knocked its branches against the side of the house in a slow, irregular rhythm. She thought, okay, not panic, not yet, something else. Something that sat just underneath panic and hadn't decided what it was yet. She put the test in her sweater pocket and stood up, washed her hands, looked at herself in the mirror, the mascara from yesterday she hadn't fully removed, the line between her brows, the hair that had been a lot of things that morning and had settled on none of them. Then she picked up her phone, put it back down, picked it up again. She didn't call Marc. She called her OB and made an appointment for the following Thursday. Then she sat on the bathroom floor, with her back against the tub and her knees pulled up and the crack in the tile running past her left foot like it was pointing somewhere, and she stayed there until her legs went stiff. The maple kept knocking. She hadn't called him. She told herself she just needed a few days. She needed to be sure. She needed to find the right moment, the right words, the right version of "I need to tell you something" that didn't sound like the end of something. Her phone screen lit up on the floor beside her. "You around tonight?" She stared at the notification until it dimmed. Then she typed, "Tired. Early night." Talk tomorrow. 3 dots. Then, sure. Sleep good. She set the phone face down on the tile. The heat clicked on somewhere in the walls, and the radiator in the hallway knocked once, twice, and went quiet. The ultrasound appointment was on a Thursday at 11:15. Kristen had told her third graders she had a dentist appointment, which felt like the kind of lie that was forgivable, or at least survivable. She'd left the classroom in the hands of the substitute, Ms. Ferreira, reliable, slightly terrifying. The kids loved her, and driven the 12 minutes to the clinic on Brawley School Road with the radio on and her hands too tight on the wheel. The image they gave her afterward was small, black and white, more abstract than she'd expected, more like weather radar than something that was going to become a person. She stood in the parking lot for a moment after she got back to her car, holding it with both hands in the November wind, and thought, "This is real now." She put it in an envelope, slid the envelope into her bag, into the front pocket where she kept things she needed to remember, her school ID, her chapstick, the grocery list she always forgot to look at. Zipped it closed. She still hadn't told Marc. 5 days. She'd been carrying this for 5 days, sleeping next to her phone, texting him back in the mornings like everything was fine, like she wasn't doing silent arithmetic in the dark at 2 a.m. She knew it wasn't fair. She told herself she was protecting him, which she knew was only partially true. The other part, the part she didn't say out loud even to herself, was that she was protecting this. Whatever they were, the Whole Food Saturdays and the soup from Gilead Road and the way he sat at her kitchen table with his elbows out like he had nowhere better to be. She was afraid that a single sentence could change the shape of all of it. Patricia Donovan had been inviting Kristen to lunch since she was 8 years old, and there was nothing unusual about the call that Wednesday morning. "Come Thursday. I'm making that potato soup you like. I have too much of it." And Kristen had said yes the way she always said yes to Patricia, without thinking too hard about it. She brought an apple pie, homemade, the crust slightly uneven on one side because she'd gotten distracted by a student email halfway through crimping it, but it smelled right, and that was most of the battle. Patricia's kitchen was the same as it had always been, the yellow walls that had never been repainted. The rooster clock above the stove that was 6 minutes fast and had been since 1998. The smell of onions and butter and something herby underneath, the kind of cooking that took all morning and made the windows fog up. They talked about Kristen's class, about the neighborhood association drama Patricia had been roped into, about a documentary Patricia had watched about Patagonia that she couldn't stop thinking about. Kristen ate 2 bowls of soup and most of a piece of pie and felt, for the first time in 5 days, something close to normal. She'd set her bag on the chair by the door when she came in. That chair, the one that had always been the bag chair, the coat chair, the everything-you-carried-in chair, and somewhere between the first bowl of soup and the second, she'd gone to get her phone out of it, and the front pocket was open. She didn't notice. Patricia found it 20 minutes later. Kristen was washing up at the sink, her back turned, telling a story about the geography kid and the map he'd redrawn for the 3rd time now, each version slightly more detailed, more specific, his own house at the center growing larger. Patricia had gone to the chair to get her reading glasses from her own bag, and the envelope was on the floor beneath it, small, white, unsealed, the corner of the image visible. Patricia recognized the name on it, the clinic letterhead, the date. She stood very still for a moment. She was not a woman who panicked easily. She'd raised Marc Donovan, which required a particular kind of steadiness, the ability to hold space for someone who moved fast and felt things slowly, who led with logic when he was scared and only showed you the fear in retrospect. She knew her son. She knew how he'd react to something unexpected, controlled first, feeling later, and only in private. She also knew Kristen, had known her since she was a small girl with a serious expression and a library book always within reach, knew the way she held things close when she wasn't sure what to do with them, knew the particular quality of the silence she'd been carrying the past few days, quieter at the table, laughing a half-second late, the way she'd glanced at her phone twice without picking it up. Patricia put the envelope back on the floor, exactly where it had been. Then she went to her chair and found her reading glasses and sat down. Kristen finished the story about the geography kid. Patricia laughed in the right place. The call came that night at 8:47. Kristen was on her couch with a mug of chamomile she'd made 20 minutes ago and hadn't touched. Her feet tucked under her, a student's drawing on the cushion beside her, a house with a lopsided chimney and a sun with too many rays, made for her by a girl named Becca who was 6 and had opinions. She'd been looking at it without seeing it. Her phone showed Patricia's name. She felt her stomach drop before she answered. "Hey, Patricia. Hey, sweetheart." A pause, the careful kind. "I need to ask you something, and I want you to know that however you answer, it doesn't change anything on my end, okay?" Kristen's hand went still around the mug. "Okay," she said. "Honey." Patricia's voice was soft, not pitying, just steady, the way it always was. "Does my son know?" The silence answered before Kristen did. She closed her eyes. The chamomile steam drifted up and disappeared. Outside, a car moved slowly down the street, its headlights sliding across the ceiling. "I was going to tell him," she said. I needed to find the right—" "I know." Patricia said it without any edges. "I know you were. How did you—" Kristen stopped. "The bag. The envelope fell. I didn't open it. I didn't have to." Kristen put her hand over her mouth for a moment, not to stop herself from crying. She wasn't crying. She was too tightly wound for that, just to have somewhere to put the feeling. "I'm sorry," she said. "You shouldn't have found out like that. You don't have anything to apologize to me for." Patricia paused. "But Kristen, he needs to know, not because of obligation, not because of any of that. Because he would want to. I know. He's going to be okay with this. You don't know that." A gentle sound on the other end. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. "I've known my son for 38 years. I know exactly how he's going to react." Kristen looked at the drawing on the cushion. Becca's lopsided chimney, the sun with too many rays. "He's going to call you tonight," Patricia said. "I won't say anything. That's not my place. But when he calls, maybe don't let it go to voicemail this time." Kristen breathed in, breathed out. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay." Patricia's voice warmed. "The rest of that pie is still here, by the way, in case you need something to do with your hands tomorrow." She almost laughed. "I'll come get it." "Good." A beat. "Good night, sweetheart." "Good night, Patricia." She held the phone in her lap after they hung up. The chamomile had gone cold. The drawing looked back at her from the cushion. The house, the lopsided chimney, the sun that had more rays than it needed. Her phone buzzed. Marc's name. She looked at it for one breath. 2. She picked up. "Hey," she said. "Hey." His voice was different, quieter, something underneath it she couldn't name yet. "You have a minute?" She sat up straighter, pulled her feet down to the floor. "Yeah," she said. "I have a minute." Outside, the wind picked up. The maple branch knocked against the siding once, slow and deliberate. "Good," he said. "Because I'm outside." She turned toward the window. Through the thin gap in the curtain, the yellow-white glow of headlights sat still in front of her house. She stood up. She opened the door before he knocked. He was standing on the porch with his jacket still on, hands in his pockets, the Audi running at the curb with the headlights on. Steam rose from his breath in the cold air. He looked at her the way he'd been looking at her since October, that careful, certain look, except there was something else in it tonight, something she couldn't quite read yet. "You going to let me in?" he said. She stepped back from the door. He came in. Didn't take his jacket off immediately, just stood in her entryway, the narrow one, with the coat hook she'd put up herself, and one of which was slightly crooked, with the rug that had been a housewarming gift from her mother 6 years ago and had survived 2 moves, and looked at her. "My mom called me," he said. Kristen crossed her arms, not defensively exactly, more like she needed somewhere to put her hands. "I know. She didn't tell me anything." He was watching her carefully. "She just said I should come over, that there was something you needed to tell me." Kristen looked at the floor for a moment. The rug, the slightly crooked coat hook, all the ordinary, stayed things. "Come sit down," she said. She'd left the chamomile on the coffee table, cold and untouched, the string of the tea bag draped over the side of the mug like it had given up. She didn't offer him anything. She sat on the couch and he sat beside her, close, not quite touching, and she reached for her bag on the cushion next to her and found the envelope in the front pocket where she'd put it back after the clinic. She held it for a second. Then she handed it to him. He took it without looking at it immediately. He looked at her first, a quick, searching look, and then he turned it over and opened it and took out the image and held it in both hands under the lamp. She watched his face. He was still. Not the controlled kind of still, the kind he used in meetings or on calls when he was managing information. This was different. This was the stillness of someone who'd just heard something true and was letting it settle all the way down. His jaw moved once, then stopped. "How long have you known?" he asked. His voice was even, not cold, even. 9 days, she said. He nodded once, slowly. Set the image on the coffee table, face up. 9 days, he said again, not like an accusation, just like he was placing it somewhere. "I know." She held her own hands in her lap, one thumb moving over the other the way it did when she was nervous, rubbing the same small patch of skin over and over. "I wanted to find the right moment. I didn't want to—" She stopped. "Scare me," he said. She looked at him. "Yeah." He was quiet for a moment. The heat clicked on somewhere in the walls. The radiator in the hallway knocked once. The same knock it always made. The one she'd stopped hearing months ago, but that she heard now, clearly, in the silence. "Were you scared?" he asked. "Yes." "Are you still?" She thought about the bathroom floor, the crack in the tile, the 2 tests she'd put in the back of the cabinet under the sink because she hadn't known what else to do with them. "A little," she said. "Kind of a lot, actually." He reached over and covered her hands with one of his, not a dramatic gesture, just his hand on hers, warm and still, the way he did everything. His thumb moved once across her knuckles. "I'm not scared," he said. "Marc, I mean it." He turned to look at her properly. "I know you were trying to protect me. I know that's why you waited. And I don't want to do the thing where I make you feel worse about the 9 days. That's not what this is." He paused. "But I need you to hear me say this. I'm not scared." She searched his face. He wasn't performing calm, that she would have recognized. This was the real thing. The same steadiness that had been there on the porch in October, in the kitchen on the Wednesday with the soup, in all the ordinary moments she'd been cataloging without meaning to. "How are you doing that?" she said. "Doing what?" "Being this—" She gestured vaguely. "Okay." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but the thing that came before one. "Because I've had longer to think about what I want than you know," he said. "And what I want is you. This," he glanced at the image on the table, "is just more of that." She felt something loosen in her chest. Not all at once, slowly, like something that had been braced against impact, finally deciding the impact wasn't coming. "You're going to say something that sounds too good to be true," she said. "Probably." He didn't look away. "Doesn't mean it's not true." They stayed on the couch for a long time. He'd finally taken his jacket off. She'd pulled the blanket from the back of the couch over her legs, and they'd talked, really talked, the kind she'd been putting off for 9 days, about what it meant and what came next and what they both needed. He didn't make promises that sounded like speeches. He was specific, concrete. He said he wanted to be at every appointment, said it the way he said things in his business voice, except somehow softer, like a decision he'd made before the meeting started and was now putting on the table. She said she was worried about the distance. He said he was already looking at restructuring his schedule. She said she didn't want him to feel like she'd trapped him. He looked at her for a long moment after that one. "Kristen." His voice was quiet. "I drove to Huntersville in November and stayed for 2 months. I wasn't trapped. I was home." She bit the inside of her cheek, looked at the tea bag draped over the mug, the cold chamomile, the image on the coffee table between the lamp and the edge of his knee. "Your mother's going to be insufferable about this," she said finally. He exhaled, and a real laugh this time, surprised out of him. "She's going to be unbearable. She's going to knit things. She already knits things. She's going to knit more things, specific things, with colors." Kristen laughed too, the first real laugh in 9 days, unguarded and slightly undignified. And he turned toward her when she did it, the way he always did, like the sound was something he wanted to be facing. "Hey," he said, softer. She looked at him. "I would have wanted to know on day 1, he said. "For the record." "I know." She held his gaze. "I'm sorry. I know you are." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the one that always came loose, the one she was always pressing back herself. "You don't have to keep being sorry." She let out a slow breath. Outside, the wind had settled. The maple was quiet. The street was empty, the way residential streets got after 9 on a weeknight, all the houses locked up, the neighborhood doing its patient, ordinary thing. She walked him to the door around midnight, his jacket back on, her blanket left on the couch in a heap. The image still on the coffee table. She'd left it there deliberately, some part of her wanting to see it in the morning light instead of locked back in an envelope. He paused in the doorway. "I want to tell my mom together," he said. "Officially. Sit down with her. She already knows. She knows there's something. She doesn't know it from us." He said it carefully. "There's a difference." Kristen nodded. "Okay. Sunday?" "Sunday's good." He looked at her for a moment. That look, the one she still didn't have a word for but had stopped needing one. And then he leaned in and pressed his lips to her forehead, slow, like punctuation. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, he was stepping off the porch. "Lock the door," he said, without turning around. "I always lock the door. You've left it unlocked 3 times since October." She opened her mouth, closed it. "Good night, Marc." "Good night, Kristen." She watched him walk to the Audi. The door closed. The engine turned over. The headlights came on. She stood in the doorway until the car reached the end of the street. Then she locked the door, leaned her back against it. Put her hand flat on her stomach. The first time she'd done it since Thursday. The first time it had felt like something other than fear. And stood there in the quiet hallway, the coat hook slightly crooked above her, the rug her mother had given her under her feet, the radiator doing its thing in the wall. She stayed like that for a long time. The image was still on the coffee table. She didn't put it away. 6 months later, the coat hook was still crooked. Kristen had meant to fix it, had Googled it once, watched 40 seconds of a YouTube video, decided she had other things to do. The hook held its place on the wall at a slight angle, and now there were 2 jackets on it instead of 1. Hers, the green one with the broken zipper she kept forgetting to repair, and his, the dark wool one that smelled like him even when he wasn't there. She'd stopped seeing the angle. It was just the hook now. It was just how the entryway looked. May in Huntersville was different from November. The maple out front had come back. Slowly at first, just a few pale green suggestions along the branches. Then all at once the way trees did, like they'd been waiting for permission. The mornings were warm enough to take coffee on the porch, which she did every day now. Her mug in both hands, her feet bare on the wood, even when it was still cool. The neighbor's dog had started coming to the fence when she sat out there. She'd started bringing it the end of whatever banana she hadn't finished. The baby was due in August. Marc had not moved in, not officially. Not in the way that involved a lease or a forwarding address, but the evidence disagreed. His running shoes were by the back door. His coffee was in the cabinet, the specific kind, the one she'd complained about the smell of and now made for him every morning without thinking. There was a second toothbrush. There was a phone charger that lived on his side of the bed, and there was a his side of the bed, which had happened so gradually that she couldn't have said exactly when. He'd restructured his schedule the way he'd said he would. Fewer trips to Boston, more from Charlotte. The COO handling what the COO was always supposed to handle. She'd asked him once if he resented it. The adjustment, the compression of something he'd spent 15 years building into a shape that left room for her. He'd looked at her over the kitchen table, his elbows out, the way he always sat, and said, "I built the company so I could have choices. This is me choosing." She'd gone back to her bowl of cereal and not said anything else. She'd thought about it for 3 days afterward. The Sunday with Patricia had happened the way Marc said it would. The three of them at the kitchen table in the Donovan house, the rooster clock 6 minutes fast, the yellow walls holding all that old light. Patricia had cried, which Kristen hadn't expected, and then had immediately gotten up to put the kettle on, which she had. She'd made tea for all three of them, and come back to the table and taken Kristen's hand, and held it for a moment without saying anything. Then she'd looked at her son and said, "You took long enough." Marc had said, "I'm aware." And that was mostly that. Patricia had not knitted anything yet, but there was a project bag on the armchair in the sitting room that Kristen had not asked about. The yarn inside looked like it might be yellow, or possibly green. She'd decided not to look too closely. Room 14 had done its end-of-year celebration 2 weeks early, because the schedule had moved around and these things happened. The geography kid, his real name was Owen. She'd stopped calling him the geography kid around March, though he'd earned it again in April by submitting a project mapping every student's house in the class with himself at the center, had made her a card. On the cover, he'd drawn a house with a very detailed floor plan, which was not a typical card design for a third grader, but was completely typical for Owen. Inside, in his careful, slightly too large handwriting, "Thank you for letting me be in the center." She'd put it on the refrigerator. Marc had asked about it. She'd told him the story. He'd stood at the fridge reading the card for a long time. "That kid's going to be fine," he said. "He's 8. Still." He turned around. "He already knows the important stuff." She'd looked at him across the kitchen, at the wrinkled collar and the coffee mug and the man who had driven to Huntersville in November and never really left, and thought, yeah, okay, maybe. The last week of May, they walked the old route, the one from October, past the elementary school, around the pond, the path she'd walked 100 times without thinking about why it still felt like the right one. The evening was long and warm, the kind that arrived in May like a reminder that the good months were real. The pond caught the light. A kid on a bike came from the other direction and swerved politely around them. Kristen's hand was in Marc's. Her other hand was where it had taken up residence these past 2 months, resting against the side of her stomach, half-conscious, the way you held something you were still getting used to having. "I keep thinking about what you said," she said. "I say a lot of things. On the porch, in October." She watched the path ahead. "That you'd been about to say something for a long time." "Yeah. What was it exactly? Like, what were the actual words you had in your head?" He was quiet for a few steps. The pond moved. A heron stood at the far edge, perfectly still, doing what herons did. "I think it was just your name," he said. "That's honestly all it was. I just wanted to say your name and have you know what I meant by it." She looked at him. He was watching the path. Something easy in his face, the late light catching the side of it. She thought about the kitchen table, the soup from Gilead Road, the 9 days she'd carried something alone because she'd been afraid of the shape it would make when she said it out loud, and then the way he'd sat on the couch with the image in both hands and not flinched, not once. She tightened her hand in his. He didn't say anything, just held on. The heron lifted off from the far edge of the pond, slow and unhurried, its wings spreading wide, the whole thing so quiet it almost didn't seem real. They both watched it until it cleared the tree line and disappeared. They kept walking. The streetlights came on while they were still out. That moment in May when the evenings finally stayed long enough to make you forget they ever left. They came back the way they always did, past the elementary school, back onto Quail Ridge Drive, the neighborhood settling into its evening self around them. Kristen's porch light was on. She had left it on this time. Final message. Some loves don't arrive like an event. They grow slowly in the ordinary moments, in the second bowl of soup, the walk around the pond, the coat hook that nobody fixes because it becomes part of how home looks. Marc spent years building something big enough to have options. He chose the one that scared him most, and found it was the only one that made sense. Kristen spent years being careful, carrying things alone, finding the right moment, protecting everyone else's reaction before her own. She learned that sometimes the bravest thing isn't a grand gesture, it's just picking up the phone. The ultrasound had fallen from a bag on a chair in a kitchen that smelled like onions and butter and years of the same good life. Patricia Donovan had found it and understood what it meant before anyone else had said a word. She called her daughter-in-law before she called her son. Some things don't need to be explained. They just need someone steady enough to hold the space until everyone finds their way back. Think about the person who has always been part of your life, the one who was there before everything else. What would you say to them if you finally ran out of reasons to wait? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your participation means a lot to the channel. If Kristen and Marc's story meant something to you, subscribe. There are more stories like this one coming. And if you're not subscribed yet, today's a good day to fix that.